Today's episode is sponsored by Elation Health and is the first of our My DPC Story Partner Spotlight series. In primary care today, physicians face unsustainable pressure to balance patient care with compliance and documentation requirements. Elation Health alleviates that burden and allows independent practices and primary care organizations to focus on what's most important: providing phenomenal care. In today's episode, we will hear from two DPC physicians, Dr. Sara Pastoor and Dr. Rebecca Byard. Dr. Sara Pastoor is a clinically active family physician and currently serves as the Director of Primary Care Advancement at Elation Health, where she advocates for primary care and its powerful role in the healthcare system. She also is co-director of Presence Health, an integrated primary care and behavioral health direct primary care practice in Austin, Texas. Dr. Pastoor is a seasoned physician executive with 20 years of experience in primary care innovation, patient-centered medical home, health system transformation, organizational change management, population health, EMR optimization, quality improvement, and health technology. She is a fellow of the American Academy of Family Physicians and spent the first 15 years of her career in the Army Medical Department. Dr. Pastoor has also led patient-centered transformation and primary care expansion in the academic and employer-sponsored primary care settings. Dr. Rebecca Byard is the proud owner of Direct Care Physicians of Pittsburgh, Mount Lebanon. She went to medical school at Marshall University, then attended residency for family medicine at the Washington Hospital in Washington, Pennsylvania. She worked for the residency program as an attending for 3 years while juggling moonlighting at 4 other jobs and eventually left primary care for a better paying job in urgent care. She stayed there for 4.5 years and was able to cut out 3 of the 4 moonlighting gigs. When she started looking for opportunities for growth, she did not find anything in urgent care and started to consider going back to primary care. She missed those long-term relationships, and she learned about direct primary care and decided that this was the answer to getting her back into primary care. Her DPC is located in Mount Lebanon, Pennsylvania, close to where she grew up. She loves her new patients and her DPC journey. Welcome, Dr. Pastoor, to the podcast.
Hi, Marielle. It's so nice to see you and to meet with you, and I'm really excited to talk to you today.
I want to start with the fact that you are a DPC physician. And so I want to ask first, tell us a little bit more about your everyday practice and how did you get started in DPC?
I am a family physician and have been practicing for close to 25 years. I've been in leadership and executive roles for 20 years, but I've never stopped practicing. I've always at least continued a part-time clinical practice. And a couple of years ago, a friend of mine, I spent a long time in the Army, and an Army buddy of mine who I've worked with in the Army and also in the private sector, and who's also a friend now, approached me and said that, I'm thinking about doing this direct primary care model in collaboration with a behavioral health practice in Austin. I mean, it's a well-established behavioral health practice, and, they're looking to expand their services to include primary care as well. And they want to do it in the DPC model. And I would love to do that, but I don't want to do it by myself. Will you come do it with me? And so we went and talked to that person and, the person who was running the behavioral health clinic. And the 3 of us felt very aligned about what we wanted to do. And so we launched our DPC practice.
That's amazing that you are working with Elation as a DPC physician because Elation is so DPC centric. And with that said, how did you start working with Elation?
Well, I guess we'll start with my history of coming to work at Elation, which really has been a dream job for me. It's kind of the intersection of a variety of things that I've had the good fortune to be able to do throughout my career and really enjoyed. And now I get to do them all at Elation. And, that has to do with being able to really deeply understand primary care and working on optimizing workflows, implementing EHRs, figuring out, how can the user make the most of their EHR experience to deliver better patient care, and the use of data to really power better delivery of patient care to drive better outcomes. And primary care advocacy. I've really had the opportunity to do a lot of fun things throughout my career. And now I get to do all of them at once at Elation. And I got here because Elation had not had a physician before, and they were in a position about 10 years into being a company that they were ready to hire a physician. And through some very fortunate events, I was working for someone who actually knew someone at Elation and found out that they were hiring. And so I applied. And actually, it was kind of cool because I got to help co-write my job description before I was even hired to say, if a physician worked at Elation, what should a physician do? And then, I spent the first year really just trying to understand the organization and where I could bring value and sort of define what my role is. And so I think I've got my feet under me now and have had the opportunity to meet with so many wonderful customers that we have and collaborate with external parties, the American Academy of Family Physicians, the American Board of Family Medicine, and several other groups that are really working hard, all of us pulling on the same rope to advance the primary care agenda. And so it's really been a wonderful opportunity for me.
It speaks volumes, though, that you have so much experience to bring to the table. And especially with so many EHRs out there, it is really amazing to have a DPC physician who is able to think about workflows from a DPC perspective and advocacy and the goal of family medicine and trying to get family medicine higher on the priority list when it comes to patients in our individual communities. So can you speak to the history as to where Elation came from and how valuable it can be for the everyday DPC physician?
Elation was launched originally by our co-founders, Kina and Kanan Fong, who are siblings. And they kind of grew up in their father's family medicine practice. He had a solo practice, still is a solo practicing family physician. And he had been on paper charts for his entire career. And they decided, it's time, Dad, for you to transition over to electronic health records. And so they went out and looked for, the right platform for him and found that everything was really built around coding and billing. And that was not the kind of family doctor that he is. He's really very patient-centered and spends time with his patients and, really works hard to take wonderful care of them. And as all family physicians do, but, they just did not want to saddle him with an EHR that was built around coding and billing. And so they said, well, we'll just have to build our own. And so they really built their platform around the doctor-patient experience and trying to make everything support that patient relationship, because that really is the heart and soul of high-quality primary care, is that doctor-patient relationship. And, that's hard to do. It's really hard to accomplish. Technology historically has been such a disruptor of that relationship and eroded the clinical experience. And so they've worked very hard to create something that is intuitive, that feels easy to use, that does not create a distraction, and that allows you to get through your work in a more efficient way. And so that it creates clinical context. So you have the right information that you need right at your fingertips. Documentation is easier, all of those things. And that's really what DPC is about, is that relationship, right? It's not about coding and billing. It's about the doctor-patient relationship. The direct primary care model really is the purest form of primary care that I know. We work for our patients. Our patients are our employers. And, if we're not doing everything in their best interest, they can just take their money and walk. And there's no, third party in the exam room driving other behaviors or other incentives. And so because Elation was built around that doctor-patient relationship and really trying to make that experience as good as it can be, I think that's why it fits so well in direct primary care. And at the end of the day, our whole goal is to elevate primary care and to help primary care practices and primary care providers deliver the best care that they possibly can and make it easy to do that without technology getting in the way.
I love hearing that. And I thank you so much for sharing the history there, because it really puts into perspective why so many DPC physicians and clinics and patients benefit from the technology that Elation has built out for them. And on that note, I want to ask, in terms of the future of Elation, Many people are very, very happy with the product and are very happy with the way it allows them to focus on the patient-doctor relationship, like you highlighted. What is coming down the pipeline for Elation?
I would say in 2022, we are really focused on reducing administrative burden. And, that comes in different forms, especially depending on your payment model. But I definitely have been connecting with a lot of our DPC physicians and just to check in with them and find out, what are your top 3 sources of administrative burden in your practice? And so we are really trying to zero in on clinician efficiencies and make that work as easy as it needs to be. So anything that grinds your gears, that feels like this is harder than it needs to be, it's too many clicks than it ought to be, I have to do this too many times, or, this just feels like an uphill battle. We want to fix those problems. If it's a paper cut, a pebble in the shoe, whatever it is, those are the things that we're really trying to explore and understand better so that we can fix those this year.
Awesome. This just really gets me pumped to hear Dr. Rebecca Bayard's story in that she is using Elation every day in her practice. And just hearing those words, it's so invaluable to know that out there in the technology world, there is a company like Elation who's able to take feedback from direct primary care physicians who are so focused on the patient-doctor relationship and, improve their own product to help the doctor-patient relationship go into the future. And with that said, is there anything else that you'd like to share about Elation?
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about how EHRs are going to transform and innovate sort of the technology landscape in the future. Historically, the EHR has sort of been this vendor lock, closed architecture that keeps all of its information inside and doesn't connect to anything else. And so if you need other technology to do other things or solve other problems in the workflow, those are separate things. It's a separate platform, a separate logon and password, a separate place to store data. And those types of EHRs really do not enable the new work that is required to deliver high quality, high value primary care. And so those EHRs, I think, are going to die. And, people won't be able to get what they need out of them. And the way of the future really is creating this digital ecosystem where you have an EHR with an open architecture. It's sort of what we're starting to call a headless EHR. And it connects easily with other technologies. So you create this tech stack that, you can innovate yourself by choosing the best in breed, most optimal tools that you need, and then just plug it into your EHR. So the data flows, the workflow flows, everything is seamlessly integrated. And, it's like using an iPhone, right? Everything's all connected and you have everything right there. And the EHR winds up being this core operating system that is the foundation. And that is the direction that Elation's going. And that's how we're going to really drive success and better outcomes for our customers and their patients in the future.
I just love that speaks to the heart of autonomy that fuels DPC doctors everywhere. So thank you for that.
Yes, you're welcome.
So thank you so much, Dr. Pastoor, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really enjoyed it.
And now I am excited to bring to the podcast Dr. Rebecca Bayard of Direct Care Physicians of Pittsburgh, Mount Lebanon. Thank you so much, Dr. Bayard, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
It's so exciting to talk with you because as I was sharing before we recorded this podcast, I just recorded an episode with your partners at Direct Care Physicians of Pittsburgh. So it's so exciting to hear a little bit more about your experience as well.
Thank you. It is a small world.
So I want to start with the fact that you recently opened. You opened in October of 2021. And so I wanted to ask if you could paint a little bit of a picture for the audience as to what did your professional life look like at the time?
So in October of last year, I was still working full-time at an urgent care location. And I had just opened up. I only had a few patients at that time, but I was definitely juggling both careers, right, at that same time. So I stayed on with urgent care until the end of last year and put all of my efforts into DPC as of the 1st of January.
Wow. And I want to back up a little bit there because the first question that comes to mind is you definitely, worked your tail off in that short time to open and go full bore with DPC, but At what point within that period or before did you learn about DPC and decide that DPC was right for you?
So I had been in urgent care it ends up being about 4.5 years by the time I left. And I'd say somewhere around the winter of like the beginning of 2021, I was looking at my options to kind of grow within the urgent care that I worked for. And I didn't find any opportunities there for my professional growth. So I started to look back at other ways of practicing medicine. And I think I was just on the AAFP's website and came across an advertisement for the DPC Summit. And I thought, well, what's DPC? I've never heard of this. I should probably know. And so I just got hooked into it that way by accident completely. And then the more I learned about it, the more I felt like that was the right thing for me to do.
Incredible. And I want to highlight though that you were looking at your own professional growth. And that is something that it really feeds the spirit of autonomy when we choose DPC. And so, the ability to not lose yourself and to do what you want to do and still be able to take care of patients the way you want to. I love that. And so I want to tie that in now to when you had decided DPCs for me opened a soft open in October and then full bore in January. I want to ask, what was your journey like in looking at all the tech that's out there and choosing the tech that is working for your clinic today?
Sure. So I had read a lot on the different options for an electronic health record before I started actually to play with them. I had a trial membership with Elation as well as one other EHR. And I really felt like that was what made my decision, is that I was able to play around with them and see what made sense to me. I really liked about Elation that you didn't have this 100 things you had to click through, to get to what you needed to be at in your EHR. And it was so intuitive to me that I knew right where to go to do things without even having to ask. It also allowed me to use more, to type more and have more dialogue types of things in my notes. I don't have checkboxes off for my physical exam. I have just a blank that I can write whatever I need to write in there. So that also drew my attention.
Wonderful. And if people aren't aware, one of the things I love about Elation is that they have the sample chart that you can play around with. And so it really allows you, like you're talking about, to experience what it could be like and envision your practice working in a workflow through that sample patient chart. So I definitely encourage people to check out the sample patient chart if you're exploring EMRs right now. And when you talk about the idea that you're able to write more rather than check boxes, I love that because with you being part of the Direct Care Physicians of Pittsburgh, if you need to cover Dr. Gentili's practice and vice versa, that's, when I think about charts, that's what I loved is when I could read the doctor's thoughts on paper. This is why they did what they did. This is what they're thinking. This is what the next steps that are planned are. And I really love that you're able to do that without having to worry about those extra check boxes. So that's great.
Yeah, I appreciate all of that about Elation. It's perfect for DPC.
How easy was it for you to open your practice then to use Elation on an everyday basis?
So it was so easy. The contact for my implementation did a drive-through and had me run through a couple of things like the note and billing. And he had me do that once, maybe over a 15-minute Zoom call. And everything else just made sense and fell into place. So I didn't spend more than 15 minutes training on Elation, and I was still able to pick it up and use it on day one. So I think that speaks a lot for just how intuitive the EHR is. So I'm just so glad that I went with Elation.
And in terms of from the patient's perspective, I want to ask there because patients are also very used to different sorts of EMRs. And I know the EMR experience on the patient side can be very frustrating. So what has your experience been with regards to Elation in your patients?
So the patients that I have that are computer savvy, they really appreciate the Passport feature, which is like the patient portal for Elation. And they'll communicate with me through that instead of outside of Elation so that I can really capture all of those conversations. It seems like they appreciate it a lot. I have one patient who actually, she reads all of my notes after I complete them. And she'll actually text me and say, hey, that was really good. I liked what you wrote, and it was factual. Or she'll say, you missed this, there was something that we didn't talk about or you misunderstood. And so it gives the patients access to their healthcare information, which you don't always see that.
Definitely. And especially the fact that it has the passport feature. I know in my practice, as well as many other practices, having a portal or a passport, it's extremely helpful for like what I've found is that you don't necessarily have to answer questions because the patient can log in and see.
They can find it themselves.
Yes. Yeah. It's wonderful. It definitely empowers both the physician as well as the patient. Now, in terms of other features that you love about Elation, I want to ask about workflows. What are some of your favorite Elation workflows that work well for both your patients and your practice?
So the first one I would mention would be the membership feature. That's how I do all of my billing. So it's right through Elation. They have a partner, Stripe, and they process the transactions on the back end. And so you have immediate access to reports on your patient membership. So I can real quickly get in there, send them an invoice for their registration fee or their monthly fee, and just hit send, and it'll go to whatever contact information they prefer. And then I can, on the back end, check and see, have they paid me yet? When did they pay me? They paid me with a credit card, or if I have to go ahead and document someone paid me with a check, I can put that in there, and it's all kept in one place, which makes it really easy for me. The second thing I was thinking of, the eFax feature. So when I was getting everything set up in my office, fax machines cost a couple $100s, and then you have to pay to have a line installed for the fax line. So Elation has an eFax feature where I don't have to worry about any of that. So one of my favorite workflows is once I'm onboarding a patient and I get their request for release of information in for their other providers or the previous providers, I just scan it in, and I then create a letter to the fax number where I want to send it to. And I can just really quickly type in, so-and-so has recently joined my practice and would appreciate you sending me their health records. And then I fax it straight from Elation. And the best part is when it comes back to me in Elation, because then it's just so easy to keep all in one spot.
Definitely. One more question I have about workflows is, once a practice is established, one of the challenges sometimes is to try to find previous mammograms or previous notes on a medical issue. So can you talk us through what it's like using Elation to find stuff quickly that you might need to reference in your patient notes?
Yeah, sure. So part of my onboarding process is pulling in some of those historical documents. And once you scan them into the chart, or if you make a note in the chart about whatever that lab finding was, it's all sorted chronologically. And you can actually label the documents that you just drag and drop them right into the chart. You can label them, and you can use tags to search them by. So they're actually very savvy as far as how they let you search for historical documents like that. You can just do it chronologically, or you can search by whatever the tag or the keyword is.
I could definitely envision people really loving hearing about that feature.
Yeah.
And when you talk about these amazing workflows in terms of being self-sufficient, really, do you have staff at your practice?
That's a good question. No, right now it's just me. I'm thinking maybe by the end of the year that I'll be bringing on a medical assistant or a nurse. But right now I have to do everything. So keeping it all in one place is definitely helpful.
Definitely. And, we talk about keeping overhead low when you open, but keeping the amount of workflows when you open down is speaking from experience. It is something that people should really think about when they're choosing tech. So I want to ask there, how do you communicate with your patients? I
usually use the passport feature, and this is really for my computer savvy patients. I do have a few that I email or text with, but the passport feature for those tech savvy patients, they really appreciate it.
Another question I want to ask, what has your experience been with regards to Elation's customer support?
Elation's customer support has been great. I had an issue where one of my patients wasn't able to submit their membership payment that month. And I got in touch with them, and like within a day, they got back to me and had everything sorted out. So that's the only reason I've contacted them so far, which I think speaks a lot for how good of a product this actually is, because I haven't had to interact with their customer service very much at all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bayard, for sharing what you have already about your amazing experience with Elation. You're able to function as a micropractice doctor while still doing everything and still being able to really focus your time on your patients and have minimal time on the EMR. And again, I encourage people to check out that sample chart to play around with Elation and see if it will work amazingly for you and your patients. Now, one last question I have for you is, if people are looking at tech right now as they're preparing to open their DPC or they're looking to change EMRs, what words would you share with them in terms of tips or things to think about as they're choosing an EMR?
I think you hit the nail on the head by saying you have got to get into a sample chart and play around with it, because that's going to tell you right off the bat if it makes sense with how you view things and how you need to document. I would also recommend that you try to think through some of your workflows before you actually have to do them.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Bayard, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
This Sunday, look forward to hearing from Dr. Kyle Hampton of Arctos Direct Care in Fort Collins, Colorado. If you're looking to find out more about Elation Health, head on over to elationhealth.com/mydpcstory. And while you're exploring more of what Elation has to offer, be sure to get your free copy of Elation's new DPC practice checklist, where you can learn everything you need to know about planning to open a new DPC practice, from Medicare opt-out requirements to legal advice, financial support to marketing know-how, and the technology resources available to DPC physicians. If you've enjoyed the podcast and you haven't yet done so, subscribe today and share the episode with a physician you may know who needs to hear about DPC. Leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify now as well, as it helps others to find all these DPC stories. Lastly, be sure to follow us on social media. Until Sunday, this is Marielle Concepcion.